Okay, so we're gonna do a little switcheroo. Christina is actually going to be the one um, asking some questions about this new roadmap that was presented by EPA on Monday.
Hmm.
Um, and so, oh, she said ours is built in and costs $3,000. Yeah, you want good water.
Oh, for sure. You
Yeah.
don't want, you don't want to put stuff through that's going to make that gunk up and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, so anyways, so EPA announced this roadmap for confronting PFAS contamination, not just in water, but in the environment, in air, kind of a sweeping announcement. It doesn't have any teeth, so it's not a regulation, but we'll get into all of that in just a second. So yeah, we at Hydroviv have been talking about PFAS for a long time, ever since Hydroviv started. It's something that we've always been talking about, and that perspective will be important when we kind of dig into what this roadmap contains and also the timeline. So, Christina,
Yeah.
I'll let you take it.
Um, okay, cool. Because I was going to say, before we get into the details of the roadmap, for some of the people who might be joining us for the first time, I know PFAS, we've been talking about PFAS for years, but it's only just started hitting the media. I mean, John Oliver just did a segment about it not that long ago, so it's finally starting to get more attention from the media, but not everybody might know what it is. So can
Yeah.
you give us a little, in a nutshell, why are we concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. So PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. The media is referring to them as forever chemicals, and that's because they don't really break down in the environment, and they also um, accumulate in our blood. So it's a contaminant that is known to cause cancer and other really negative health impacts. Um, and so with PFAS, it is extremely persistent in the environment. It's been detected in every single state in drinking water in the US. And so it's something that we're very concerned with because of those associated health impacts. And they're ranging from like reproductive issues, cancer, like I mentioned, increased cholesterol. I know I'm missing some, Christina, but
Oh yeah, I mean there's thyroid. Oh, there's a whole bunch of reproductive things. So it's like male infertility, higher incidence of miscarriage. What was it? Preeclampsia, lower birth weight. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, and they're just finding this out. And I guess the other thing to mention is it is a family of substances that is like what? How many? 5,000 different kinds.
yeah,
So there's even regulations cover just a handful or a few. We hear about PFOA and PFOS because a lot of the nonstick pans at the stores are saying PFOA and PFOS free.
right.
But and so they've done studies on just those two, and anyway, there's definitely, they actually affect different parts of the body and they stick into different tissues. So they're
Yeah.
just starting to learn a little bit more about it. It's kind of scary.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm going to answer this question right here. Is this
oh,
an
sure.
international issue also, or just measured in the US? Yes, absolutely international.
Yeah.
Um, the US probably is more equipped to test for and regulate PFAS. So it's really concerning that PFAS aren't regulated yet because of our technology and money that we're able to actually create regulations and remove this. It just hasn't been done yet. And so, yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the other countries that we have talked about. I want to say Germany.
A lot of the studies have been
Yeah,
done in Sweden.
yeah,
And I know when I was looking into PFAS and the immunotoxicity, there were studies that talked about, they did studies on people in the Faroe Islands. I mean, I literally had to look up where that was. I mean, that's one of the most remote places in the world. And people, they were studying people in the Faroe Islands because they had PFAS in their systems. So
Yeah.
this is a global issue for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, let's dig into that roadmap a little. Yeah, what are the key components? What's it about?
So like I said, the roadmap isn't anything enforceable. So it's basically EPA saying, hey, this is our plan for how we're going to deal with this in the Biden administration. So the first thing that the roadmap kind of laid out, and the thing that we're most interested in, is actually setting those enforceable standards in drinking water. And so they are only really talking about PFOA and PFOS, as Christina mentioned. Those are the most well-known. They also are the most well-researched, and so that is important when you're creating a regulation, because so much work goes into creating these regulations, years of, trying to figure out the best way to go about it. So first and foremost, the roadmap is EPA is trying to regulate these two types of PFAS contaminants. The second thing that's really interesting is actually designating PFAS as a hazardous substance.
Really?
Yeah, and so that's really significant because that means that those polluters, those chemical manufacturing companies, and perhaps the firefighting organizations that are using these on a daily basis or whatever, they could actually be held accountable for their pollution. And so what that would mean is that these companies, these chemical manufacturers, would be able to help fund the cleanup, which is really important.
Wow.
Yeah, so that hazardous substance designation under the Toxic Substance Control Act is super important. And it would actually create money for us to combat PFAS in our drinking water. So, and that they're actually kind of linking that in the Superfund program.
I was going to ask you if that was going to be part of, so places with heavy PFAS contamination could be considered a Superfund site in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
And then those polluters would be liable for paying for the cleanup. So that's another really important component of this roadmap. Okay. And then also the kind of ones that have less teeth that we're not really going to be focusing on were an increase in monitoring, data collection, and research, which is of course extremely important. But that's something that a lot of outside organizations are doing, like EWG. Mm-hmm. So to have that government funding is of course extremely important, but it's stuff that we already should be doing. So and then also a final toxicity assessment for Gen X. So if we have anybody in North Carolina listening, you guys know Gen X better than anyone else, because it is the type of PFAS that swept through and is still problematic, an entire community in North Carolina. The Cape Fear River is just contaminated with Gen X and causing a lot of problems in that area. And then the kind of final component is about air emissions with PFAS. So not really related to water, but certainly important for, getting PFAS out of the environment. So I definitely wanted to include that as well.
Okay, cool. And one other thing I wanted to mention about the focus on PFOA and PFOS is the fact that PFOA and PFOS are no longer used in manufacturing and stuff. Its use was banned in the United States. I think one was banned in 2008 and the other was in 2014. I'm not sure if those dates are exactly right, but the problem is, because it's a forever chemical, it's still everywhere. But just because PFOA and PFOS are no longer used doesn't mean they're not in the environment, and it also doesn't mean that other types of PFAS aren't floating out there. So those are concerns for sure.
Yeah, and we actually just got this question from ZWacky1. Is there any information behind companies hiding PFAS under different names, similar to how BPA can also go by BPS or BPF? Absolutely. And that was the whole, that was like the plan of these chemical manufacturing companies dating back to the 60s. So basically they would create one, they would find a better variation, and then just kind of like keep going in that same trajectory. And that's why we have 5,000 different types of PFAS chemicals in the environment, is because they would just create replacements. So I could be getting this wrong, but I believe Gen X was a replacement for PFOA, or Gen X was a replacement for a different type of PFAS chemical. So absolutely, the names are consistently changing, the variations are changing. So even though PFOA and PFOS could become regulated, there are hundreds, thousands that are not regulated. So,
And you had written a piece about fracking and the fact that PFAS chemicals were used in some of the fracking activity, but they actually had to really dig in that report. They talked about how the chemicals that were used, first of all, it's proprietary, so they wouldn't tell you exactly what it was, but then they would use like fluoro something, and then you kind of have to read between the lines and say, oh, they must be talking about a PFAS chemical. So I remember they try and hide it that way as well.
yeah. Yep.
So why do we need federal action on PFAS chemicals? Because states have already started taking the matters into their own hands, and some states already have enforceable levels. I know Massachusetts, New York, New Hampshire, I think Michigan, and it goes on from there. I think there's 15 states so far that have enforceable levels, or guidance at least.
Yeah, that's certainly a good point. And I think a lot of people will say, well, the states are handling it. We can see that already 15 have taken action. So why can't we just let the states take care of this? This is a states issue. And that is valid, but there are a couple reasons why it's definitely problematic. So the first is that these states have a range of what's considered safe. So some states, a safe level of PFOS in tap water is 10 parts per billion, but in some states it's 70. Wait, did I say billion? I meant trillion.
Trillion, yeah, parts per trillion, yeah.
10 parts per trillion or 70 parts per trillion. So that's a very big difference. And so we kind of know the science is now saying 70 parts per trillion is way too high. 10 could even be too high as well. So it's really kind of, it's a disservice to those states or to those constituents who live in states where 70 parts per billion is safe. And so the second kind of issue is that there are some states that aren't even acknowledging PFAS as a problem.
I live in one of those. Yeah.
So it's great that, New Hampshire and Michigan and New York are taking those actions, but what about Florida? What about those states that are years, decades away from a regulation? So that's kind of why just having that federal floor is going to help everyone in the U.S. and not just those states that decide to regulate it.
And I guess it would also validate the concerns that people are, bringing up. So, it becomes something where, oh, the government has regulated this, so therefore it's not just a bunch of radicals complaining about stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I could definitely see how that's important. But you said PFAS has been used since the 50s. So, there's contamination in just about everywhere. 97% of people have PFAS in their bodies. So is all of this a little too late? It's kind of scary to realize how widespread it is now. So can we put the genie back in the bottle?
I don't think that it's too little too late. obviously we wish this roadmap, this plan, these types of regulations would have come a lot sooner. But basically what we can do at this point is just preventative action and making sure that the levels in our blood stay low. So like you just mentioned, 98% of Americans already have PFAS in our systems. And so with these action steps and with future legislation and future action out of EPA, we can just keep those levels, at a point where we're not going to get severe health impacts, hopefully. So not too little too late. These are just really important steps that hopefully will come to fruition.
So we haven't missed the critical time for action yet.
No, I don't think so. I think
okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. That gives me a little hope for the future.
Yeah.
Speaking of the future, so what's next? What is there a timeline for this for these action items?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, this is just a roadmap. It's not a regulation. It doesn't have any teeth. So it's just a plan. But EPA Administrator Reagan is predicting that we can get that really important hazardous substance designation by the summer of 2023. So I know that seems super distant in the future, but that's 2 years, it's the closest thing we've got. And so also equally, if not more important, water quality standard, he's predicting will come in the fall of 2023. So yeah, so that's kind of the timeline. That's what we're looking at in terms of actually regulating these substances. So at least the administration is, trying to give us an actual deadline for these substances, because up until this point, it's really just been Congress acknowledging it's a problem and just kind of trying to figure out how to regulate them. And so this roadmap is a very important tool for that.
So it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So for our people that are watching and that'll be joining us, on the podcast, when they're hearing this and saying, "Oh my goodness, this is a big problem," what can they do now? Because if things aren't going to happen or be instated until 2023, what can they do between now and then to protect themselves?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you can do is just be informed and figure out if PFAS are extremely persistent in your area. So the Environmental Working Group, EWG, has a great map that shows areas of the country where there are extremely high levels of PFAS and then also lower levels of PFAS as well. And EWG adds to that all the time. So more and more cities are becoming part of that map. So certainly check it out. Second, of course, you can get a water filter that removes PFAS chemicals. And so that's an important caveat, because there are tons of water filters that don't remove PFAS chemicals.
Exactly. Yes.
And so we were part of a study done by Duke University that actually tested a bunch of different brands with water filters and their ability to remove PFAS. So if you go to our website and just type in Duke, it'll be the first article that pops up. So definitely check that out. And yeah, I think those are the two things that you can do to protect yourself and your family, is just be informed and then get a water filter that removes PFAS.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you for letting us know. I guess it's definitely something positive, moving in the right direction. Yeah. But we can't relax yet. The work's just starting.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. Oh wait, actually, I think we had one question here that slipped by. I have my Hydroviv hooked up to my cold water line. What do you recommend for protection from hot water as well? And is there any study behind cold water lines versus hot? Christina, I think this would be a good one for
sure. So we focus on the toxicity based on ingestion. So it's what are you cooking with, drinking with. So I actually learned from a chef from a cooking school many years ago, and he told us, and this is way before PFAS was a thing, but this was just because he said there's all this gunk in the hot water, in the hot water tank. He's like, you don't want to be eating that. You don't want this stuff in your food. He said he always cooked using the water from the cold water line and just heated it up in the pot. So that has a few benefits. One is you're not getting stuff out of the hot water tank. You're not, exposing yourself to whatever the gunk is that's on the inside of the hot water tank. But also, you don't have to put a second unit on your hot water line. It saves you money. We don't, when we look at, washing dishes and things like that, I don't think that there's really enough of a concern for residue on the dishes or anything like that. The dish is dry and is there residue on that? I don't think that that's enough of a concern that we would say just eat and drink and cook with what's on the cold water line. But if you do really want to put something on the hot water line, you can do it. We have people who do put a unit on both lines, so it is possible. But it's, even in my own home, I just have it on the cold water line because I follow the advice of the chef. I get my water from the cold water line. I cook my pasta, it doesn't take that long to heat it up, so.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Okay, I think we should end there. But yeah, I hope that this was helpful. And as always, if you have any questions, you can DM us on our Instagram, email us at hello@hydroviv.com. And you can also, on our website, hydroviv.com, you can use our live chat feature. If you have any questions about this PFAS roadmap or anything regarding water quality, and you will likely talk to Christina,
Yep.
who is our resident scientist. So she is more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So yeah, have a great rest of your week, everyone, and thanks for tuning in.
Be safe and be well, everyone. Bye.